your stories, your service, your community. This is the Tango Alpha Lima Podcast.
Alphas, welcome to the Tango Alpha Lima Podcast. We're here to engage today's veterans through authentic stories, education, and entertainment. We're building a virtual community that celebrates continued service and supports the American Legion's mission. We're glad you're here to be a part of that community.
Back in June of 2024, we spoke with the incredible retired U.S. Army Major General Tammy Smith. General Smith served 35 years, which is like 30 too much. And her time included before, during, and after the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. After that repeal, Tammy re-enlisted with her partner by her side. They married, and Tammy became the first openly gay flag officer in Army history. We talked with General Smith about her advocacy on behalf of LGBTQ plus and military veteran communities. And honestly, some people are just natural leaders, and it's really fun when you run into someone that's just locked into their path. What do you guys remember about that interview?
Well, I personally know Tammy from having her as a guest on my show After Action, and she came on and talked about her experience about what the military climate was like, and how she's during that time she was struggling to be her authentic self because she loved the military so much, she loved her country so much, she wanted to serve, but she also loved her partner, and finding the balance, and there wasn't one. And when the opportunity came for her to step forward and be proof that you can serve honorably and be your authentic self at the same time, she took that opportunity, and again she became the first flag officer in the Army. And I think she kept that momentum despite how difficult and challenging so many like her were going through. She took up that mantle and carried that on through the veteran side, and worked and is still working to be an advocate for service members who have experiences like hers and her partners. I think she's so eloquent and non-confrontational. She approaches everything from a heartfelt human aspect, and just asks everybody to, be thoughtful and loving to one another, and help each other out. And I think that's what makes her so incredible, and it comes through in this episode. She's just so heartfelt.
I actually missed this one, Joe, so I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts were about this episode.
For me, the thing that jumped out at me is that sometimes when you have leaders who tell you what to do, and then sometimes you have leaders that will never ask you to do something that they don't do themselves. And so, as we all know, we've all read the leadership books, but, I've always found the type of leader that's willing to get in there with you and have these hard conversations and lead from the front the way that she seems to in her career. That's exactly the kind of person that I want in charge of things. Somebody that's open-minded to conversation, somebody who's willing to be uncomfortable for the benefit of others, somebody who's willing to practice what they preach and work to educate, instead of openly fight, which does nothing but make people dig their heels in most of the time. Mm-hmm. I was just very impressed by her hard-earned demeanor. I think I would give her the credit to say that who she is has been something that she's forged over the last, probably 50 years of her life. And it's, just absolutely incredible interview.
Okay, Alpha, stick around. We'll be right back with our encore episode with General Tammy Smith right after the break.
This year we have a golden opportunity. No, make that a red, white, and blue opportunity to do something truly special.
That's right, Commander. This year America is celebrating its 250th birthday.
And the American Legion family will be leading the nationwide celebrations.
The American Legion Family USA 250 Challenge is a year-long celebration honoring our nation. You can participate in the challenge by choosing one or more of the three categories.
The three categories are community service, mental wellness, and physical activity.
Whether you are doing one, two, or all three categories, you are making a difference in the lives of veterans and their families.
Visit legion.org/USA250 to learn more and register for $30. For your registration fee, you will get to choose a commemorative tech shirt, and your donations support the American Legion Veterans and Children Foundation.
Be a part of what makes our nation great.
Help us celebrate America.
Join us in the USA 250 Challenge.
Welcome back, Alphas. And today we're joined with General Smith. Welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thanks.
Well, I'm going to call you Tammy. Is that okay?
That's perfect.
Cool. I'm so thrilled that we get to chat. Most of the Alphas don't know, but you and I know each other. I've had the luxury, the honor of talking with you in a previous interview. So I'm so thrilled that now you get to chat with Joe, but not before I get to ask the first question. So, how's your wife? How's Tracy?
Tracy's doing great. Thanks for asking.
Of course.
We've recently relocated, done our last PCS in a sense, and we're still getting settled in a bit.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to definitely get into that. But because I know your story, I don't think it would be fair to the Alphas listening if we don't kind of dive into that first. So if you don't mind, can you give us a little bit of a Cliff's Notes of your story, how you got into the military, and your journey to becoming a flag officer?
I'll cram 35 years here into the next minute or so. I came into the Army a little accidentally. It was in the 81 is when I graduated high school. And all I knew is I wanted to get out of my small town of Oakland, Oregon. And I just thought the way to do that was college. And I didn't come from a family that had college money laying around. So, if I was going to do that, I was going to have to figure it out myself. And that figuring it out came out one day in my Future Farmers of America magazine. And I was reading that. I was a member, loved it. There's a little flyer in there. It said, "No money for college. Let the Army show you how. Send for free information." And that free information was a 4-year ROTC scholarship application. And so I thought, boy, if they'll pay for my college, I'll go into the Army. I've got no problem with that. And that's really how I stumbled into it. But what happened after I arrived in the Army is that I just loved it, because I just love the values. I love the people. I love, we had this sense of purpose and mission that was the same no matter who you were hanging out with. And all of those things made me like it. And so my original thought of going to the Army, getting out of Oakland, Oregon, doing my time and getting out, ended up through numerous assignments and zigs and zags and in my career, ending up being 35 years and culminating then having had the absolute privilege to serve as a flag officer for nearly 10 years at the end of my career.
Which is incredible. I mean, gosh, I can't imagine. I have to look it up. I'm terrible at military history specifically, how many flag officers there have been in military history. I can't imagine a lot. That tip of the spear is pretty narrow. So
the pyramid is pretty tight there at the top of it, and even when you look at the number of women who are being promoted, remember my class, I commissioned in 1986. So I was like the remainder of the women who had joined in 1986, which was an entirely different environment, of course, which I'm glad of many of the women who have the opportunity to join today.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it. When I came in, only of the entire DOD, I think it was 12% women. That's being generous, I think. By the time I got out, it had risen to 15%. I do wonder what the military percentage of women was in 86. Probably, if you kind of back that out.
I'm thinking it's going to be in a single digit.
Yeah, yeah, maybe.
So,
but I didn't really think that much about it being different. I mean, it showed up in my FFA magazine. It must have been for me. I look back on it now and I realize that they were looking probably for some farm boys to send in for that free information. But, at the time, you own the world when you're young. And I walked into that ROTC scholarship having no idea that we had just graduated women from West Point, that the Women's Army Corps had only disbanded in 1978, just a few years before that. We were an entirely separate army. All of these things had already happened. And and I walked in like I owned the place.
You know,
As you should.
it's funny you mentioned, first of all, I love that you said you own the world when you're young. We do fostering, and we've done so much reading on babies, and I've read so many articles that talk about how babies, almost all babies are geniuses, but there's something that happens, and if you think back, most of what we lost as we matured, which I needed to do, don't get me wrong, but I lost a lot of the really great stuff about being young too. And I feel like, as in your story, you first of all, thank you so much for taking time to hang out with us today. You rock. It means the world to me to be able to spend time talking with you. But, when you navigate that initial period of your public coming out, what were the sort of the key moments or support systems that helped you balance your personal authenticity and your professional responsibilities? Because all of a sudden you're kind of an icon in a way, but you still have work to do. And, so how do you balance that? And what was your support system like for that?
Yeah, and I guess I just kind of skipped over that part of the story. But one of the things that happened with me is, so soon after going to college and just in a new environment and thing, I discovered things about myself that many young people do. And the thing that I learned about myself that I was attracted to women and not to men. And but I knew I couldn't keep my scholarship if that was something that I became open about. So while I certainly lived my life authentically as me, I did it top secret. I mean, I hid my life from my coworkers, from my peers, and I did that for 25 years. I was under a policy or a law that said my being identified as homosexual or lesbian was just on face value an affront to military service, and that if people knew about me, then I would be discharged. And I spent 25 years in that setting. And so that sets up like how I made that transition, because I learned how to hide. And my leadership was built around this core of covering myself, of pretending that I had a separate life. I kept these little compartments, and I'd move from compartment to compartment, but they didn't cross over. And so when I hit this timeline of what is kind of like my public coming out, and where the iconic part of this comes in, is that there had been lots of people working on my behalf while I was serving to repeal this law that was known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And thankfully, that all came to be. And this was in about 2011. So September 20th, 2011, I was in Afghanistan at the time. And I remember on the day that it was finally going to take place, I just woke up and just felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. But it's not like I came out to anybody. I didn't tell anybody. I just felt safer on that day. And then I redeployed from Afghanistan in late 2011. In 2012, Tracy and I had the opportunity, because I was home and I can't get kicked out anymore. So we went ahead and we were married in Washington, D.C. in March of 2012. And then a couple months later, I got notified by the Army that I had been selected for promotion to Brigadier General. And so, she and I, and, perhaps our peers in the community, kind of had this decision to make, is like, are we going to be who we are? I mean, she's married, we're married. Am I going to just like pretend like she's just someone I'm close to at our promotion ceremony? And what we decided is that this was a leader responsibility to have an authentic life, to model an authentic life. And even though we had no idea like what was going to happen or what the blowback was going to be, we decided together that if we weren't role modeling that we were a married couple, now, even though Defense of Marriage Act was still in place and it wasn't any recognition of Tracy as my spouse, but we just felt like if we couldn't do that, like what hope does a sergeant have? Wow. And if a brigadier general can't come to a place and say, I'm here with my wife, there's, what are we going to do across the rest of the force? And we were just in this moment where, the universe caused me to cross paths in this way with this situation. And, we decided to do it. But I'm going to say that it wasn't easy to make that transition because I was so muscle memory conditioned to hide in my compartment that I actually had to learn how to be out, even though, I mean, like everybody in the Army knew I was out because it made the news.
Yeah.
So, from the ground side of things, nobody on the ground, like the people that, trying to think of the best way to put this, nobody I knew cared. And I don't mean that as in undermine the struggle. I mean, as in, like, I just want somebody that's going to have my back. And that's all that matters to me. And I don't care if, who they are or what they do on their personal time. It doesn't bother me one bit. Having said that, you're exactly right. When you made that point, the decision, if you don't show that you trust the system and you're not willing to lead from where you were, then that means a lot. That to show that you're willing to step up and share your life, not necessarily publicly, but to be open with it and be authentic. And I love that you glossed over that part of your career. And I think it's funny because, so I was injured in Iraq in 2004. I lost my left leg above the knee. My right leg is jacked up. And then in my dreams, I have two legs because that's not how I see myself. The most important thing to me is not the most important thing to other people. And so, I'm sure sometimes there's a struggle that you're a general first. You're a human being first. You're an Army flag officer. Like, that's who you are, and these other things are substantive of that. And so, whenever people gloss over things that other people might think is the big thing, the big point, that's great, because that means that you don't have your identity set in this one thing. And I just wanted to acknowledge that there's nothing wrong with glossing over something, because like I rarely, I don't bring my stuff up and people forget and they ask me to do things that I can't do. I'm like, I can't do an 8-mile hike, but thanks for offering. It doesn't hurt my feelings. It makes me feel good that people think that I can do these things.
Yeah.
Well, in my dreams, Joe, I'm 1% body fat, so.
That's rough. I don't even think I'd want to dream that. That's
early on about this glossing over it, and this is that learning to navigate and bring those compartments that were separate a little closer together, so that the compartment now is just me. And I can remember just so clearly that early in this process about my decision that I was going to have Tracy do the promotion, and that was going to be how I signaled who I was. A public affairs officer who was helping me prepare for what would be the media response to this said to me, he goes, well, you're going to have to decide right now, are you going to be the general or the gay general? Because neither one of us really just had the experience to understand that I really didn't have to choose between those two things.
I was going to say, it seems to me that that's one of the silliest things I've ever heard, because you are who you are. It's not going to spontaneously change because you do it in public. It's not going to change your character or your identity. That seems ludicrous to me.
Yeah. Well, but at the time, because, I've lived my life in the closet all this time, and here I'm going to come out to the very institution that said I had to be in the closet.
Yeah.
And, it scared me when he said that, because I thought, oh my God, I am going to have to choose. But I'm a soldier first. And, but how do I didn't know that I didn't really have to choose between those two things. And Tracy and I, we approached it kind of with the phrase that we decided for ourselves, was that we are a military family that happens to be gay, not a gay family that happens to be military, that we just chose to lead with that military identity. And Stacey, to your point, is the character of who you are is, in the end, that is what people will see.
Yeah. So a lot is happening around our country, and everything ebbs and flows and changes, and our military has evolved. And as you were talking, actually in the most recent years, for women, for the LGBTQ plus community, I was wondering, okay, let me give you a little backstory. I'm at the car wash of all places, and I go into the little waiting area while my car is being detailed, because I don't do that myself, by the way. Anyway, there's a gal over here, a gal on my left, and a gal on my right, and they start talking politics. And of course, I'm shrinking back because I definitely don't want to get in the crossfire of that. But one person, they were kind of debating the abortion, and I shrank back a little further, and then they were talking about gay rights, and I was like, and then I sat up a little bit and I started listening. I'm like, okay. One gal was talking about each state has the ability to pass laws that could restrict or inhibit the LGBTQ plus community, and it's Americans' rights to move to whichever state best reflects who they are. And I'm like, I can appreciate where that person was coming from. I stepped in and I was like, when people volunteer for the military, we have no control over where we go. Mm-hmm. So to me, we have to be respectful of the people who volunteered their lives at the altar of freedom. And that includes everyone, mm-hmm. even the LGBTQ plus community. So as a leader, mm-hmm. what kind of recommendations would you perhaps give to communities or military who find themselves living in states with those kind of restrictions? And, you've navigated some of that. What kind of tips or thoughts might you give?
Yeah, there's really two halves to that. There's the policy piece and there's the lived experience piece. And, approaching it first from a policy perspective, your car wash folks were right. You can live in any state you want, but as you pointed out, that's not true for the military, because if you have to go to Florida or Texas or one of these states that is making the choice to be more restrictive, then you just have to go. And for the people and actually the potential recruits and such who live in those states, is that mobility that they talked about moving to any state, that comes from economic freedom too. And many of the members of this group are often underemployed because they are discriminated against because of their identity. And so I think that policy side is that I think it's really important for people who have an understanding of it, people like me, people like podcasts like this, is that they explain to people some of these barriers and hardships that will face some of our service members through no fault of their own, just doing their duty. And of course, we do focus on the service member who might have barriers and face discrimination that they hadn't faced previously. But it also, it may not impact the service member at all, but it may impact their children as they move into one of these places, and they've lost a certain parental rights to make certain decisions about how they're going to raise their children. And that's another part of it. So that's the policy piece that we've got to make sure that decision makers just have an understanding of. It doesn't affect just those other people, that boogeyman. It affects our service members and many times in our families. On the other side of that, I think it's really important for the armed services to take responsibility to educate military members who are going to be moving to those states. You got to go to the Sergeant's Major Academy. I mean, it's in Texas. You just got to go. To help them understand what the lay of the land is, and what some of these barriers are and what their legal rights and protections are as a member of the military. And there's also many advocacy organizations out there who pride themselves or who exist to be subject matter experts in this, like the Modern Military Association of America, American Veterans for Equal Rights, some of these other organizations that are out there. But I don't think that the military service can outsource that to advocacy organizations. I mean, our HR professionals and our leaders really need to step out and gain their own understanding of some of these barriers that exist, because this is going to impact their soldiers and their soldiers' families. And in the end, that impacts readiness.
Yeah, I think I would ask for a follow-on question in that, there are American Legion posts across the U.S. And so if there are legionnaires who are interested in learning about the LGBTQ or the veterans in their community, what kind of resources can they look to?
There are many organizations that are looking to do this intersectional approach. Because for me, the thing about the veterans community and the LGBTQ community is that unlike many of the other communities, they come from everywhere. Then they come from big towns, little towns, they're every color, they're every socioeconomic background. They come from all over, and they're actually a community that is much more alike than they are different. And so I think that there is huge opportunity for collaboration from organizations like the American Legion to go and reach out perhaps to PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbian and Gays, and their core mission is to ensure that parents have a understanding of what their children are going through as they identify and find out who they are going through. But I think that there are many opportunities at each of the state levels to intersect these organizations, and the bulk of them, 99%, are nonpartisan when you're looking at those organizations that are there to advocate for LGBTQ people, because again, we come from all populations, so you can't be partisan about this. But I think there is huge opportunity. And because so many of these are state driven and local, even though they may have a national umbrella, they're going to speak the language of Alabama. They're going to speak the language of Oregon. They're going to speak the language of Kansas. And I think that is because they're speaking that same language already, but they're viewing the world from perhaps these two separate compartments. There is a way with a little courage and to say, I need to lead in this space, to bring a little intersection of these conversations together in a place as intimidating as walking into an American Legion if you were a member of the LGBTQ advocacy group. You're going to walk in there and find out, like, these guys really are about their character and their values, and they're on our side, and they want an inclusive America that's reflective of the Americans that volunteer to serve our country. And I really think we could get a lot of mileage out of that if that were something that we were to take on.
Yeah, I agree.
I love that. So I think a lot of times we have a tendency to, kind of like we talked about earlier, you aren't the gay general, you're a general, you're a human above all things. And I think a lot of times we have a tendency to dehumanize people that aren't like us because it makes us feel less challenged in our mindsets, whether that's the polarization comes from dehumanization of other people's life experiences and things like that we have, I think politically in a lot of ways. But
Joe, I'm going to have you start from the top on that question because I think it's a really important one, but you froze up. So I think we need to start again.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So I think a big problem that we have is that we tend to dehumanize people that don't think the same way that we think. You're not a gay general. You're not even a general when it comes down to it. You're a human being who has these incredible skills and this incredible life that you shared with us here. And I think a lot of the things that we have issues with other people, the polarization that we have in the political polarization that we're dealing with today, that just seems to get worse and worse. It seems like the more information we have, the more people close up because they don't like being challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that it's incredible that, that we can have this conversation here, that we can talk about this stuff. But the number one thing I think to take away from all this is that we're humans first. We're humans first. And all this other stuff is just colors and details on the painting. But I do, for my question though, I do kind of want to step away from this because I don't want you to think that we're only here to talk about this. You've had this incredible trailblazing career in the Army, all these zigs and zags, but everybody needs a break. Can you share a hobby or an activity that you and your wife enjoy together to unwind or stay connected amidst your demanding schedules? And not to say you can't comment on what I said if you had something to comment. I just, I do want to step away from that same conversation for a second, if you want.
Yeah, no problem. Just the last comment on that amazing statement that you made there about the people is that, sometimes we hold these stereotypes because we have never actually met someone who is othered. I mean, even when I met my wife Tracy, she had never met anybody in the Army before. And so I think that some of these opportunities to have these cross conversations, these intersectional conversations between organizations, you've got the formality of the two organizations came together. It's a formal conversation. It's not going to happen spontaneously at the car wash where you have to feel afraid, but that we can have these conversations, and then you can replace that stereotype with a real person, and you then have that to reflect on, and then to bring up in the next conversation. It's like, I used to think that way too, but then I met General Smith, and she was just like regular, so those sort of things.
Sure.
But
I agree. I think the biggest way to fix racism or issues with religion and things like that is to just meet someone who really knows their stuff and can have a conversation in a non-threatening way. Because obviously, you've got the presence. You could sit down and just dominate somebody in a conversation if you wanted to, but that doesn't make someone learn something. That doesn't make you human to them. You've got to show them that regular. She's just regular.
yeah,
Regular.
just regular. In Korea, I had a driver. He was Mr. Han, was wonderful. And on my way leaving, before I left country, we had a team dinner, like everybody in the military does. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And he was talking about, because Tracy and I were there, and he just came to adore Tracy, and he told us that in that conversation, he goes, I'm a Christian. He goes, and I was really worried about what to expect. I didn't have any idea what to expect, and I was really worried. When I came to drive for you, he goes, and then that's where he taught me to say that. He goes, you and Tracy are just regular, and
Yeah.
and so that's where. Thank you, Mr. Hom, for letting me think about it in that way. But Tracy is awesome, I got to tell you. So to jump to that. What do we do? Again, we just relocated, so we're kind of setting up what we hope is going to be our retirement community, learning to find our way to the beach and do a few things like that. And so we enjoy this transition. Has been fun, even though it has all the things that go with moving that are no fun. But if we had to pick really what we do, we like to travel. We like to see different things in the world and experience different cultures and talk to people who are different than us. And it's just something that we really, really enjoy doing.
Awesome. Thank you
Well,
so much.
on that same vein, sort of not off topic, because all of it's important, but some of the most critical years for veterans are during that transition period. And as you know, our community has been suffering from a high rate of suicide, and a lot of that is during those critical years post-service. And so I'm curious, what are you doing to keep your mental health up? How has transition been? What's been like the craziest, most unexpected thing in the ensuing years since you retired 3 years ago? So what's it been like?
Yeah, it's the first thing that you notice when you retire, at least first thing I noticed, is like nobody cares where you are anymore. And that was weird because it was like 100% accountability 24/7. And it's like, and then just one day no one cares anymore. And so that was kind of weird. It's like, well, I think I'll just go to the store now. It's no one even cares. That sort of thing. And I got asked a lot. One of the policy portfolios I had in the Pentagon towards the end of my career was the Transition Assistance Program for the Army, and was part of the working group, the interagency, the joint working group with all of the civilian agencies working on transition. And now that I am 3 years past transition, is we have to stop asking active duty folks what transition is like.
Yes.
And we have to stop keeping active duty folks to be the representative of these programs.
My
And
goodness.
we really need, I mean, if you want a general to go sit in on these interagency meetings, is take a retired one who's living through it keep them up to date on current policy, but have them take that lived experience into the room, because it is difficult. You lost your tribe, you lost your language, and
Yes.
in my case, I have the security of I was retirement eligible. My VA experience has been very positive, and all of those things. But you just sort of like tumble around like a tumbleweed for a
Right.
while. And I made a conscious decision that at least in my first year, I was going to do nothing. I wasn't going to jump right in. I didn't have a desire to be a defense contractor. I didn't. I thought I was just going to take a year and be quiet. And that was good for me personally. I think that if I had jumped into another high-speed job, I just would have been coasting on the same adrenaline that I was carrying, at the same day that I served. And I was just kicking the can down the road about how do you slow down a little bit and, find that center for yourself, and just kind of be present with your life, because you're moving at such a high rate of speed just from the nature of military service. And again, I'm preaching to the choir. So on this little bit. So yeah, I'm gonna go. It's been difficult. What I have done to try and smooth some of those difficulties is that I've I finally opened up and went ahead and asked to talk to a social worker and do a little counseling and that sort of thing, and have explored some of that, which is something I certainly wouldn't have been as open or receptive to when I was on active duty, let alone even have time to go and make the appointments and that sort of thing. I think that's helped me a great deal in helping me do that recenter, because my character is my character,
Yeah.
whether or not I'm the gay general or whether or not I'm no longer the general and I am out in the community doing the things that, and it's that recentering of realize you are who you are. And now you're who you are in a new place, but nothing fundamentally has changed about you.
That
Mm.
scares people sometimes, though. I mean, I know for
The,
me in my transition, I don't know why your story just now, what you were just talking about, it's got me a little verklempt. But in my instance, I was a Navy corpsman with 2-1 Marines, brand new father. I'd never even held my daughter yet when I got hurt. So, and then I get injured. And so now I had to figure out in a completely different, but also in a similar way, how do I take all these worlds and make them one person?
yeah.
And it was tough. It
And
was
a new world. I mean, and a new dad.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to find a way. My support system was incredible. My wife is still here. She's awesome. She barely hits me. Like I got all these kids now. Like I got all these really great things going on in my life. And I don't know how people do it without a support system. I don't know how people do it when they have to be closed up or closeted, or I can't imagine the struggle. And I'm sure in some ways when you got permission, it almost felt like a trap. I'm sure in some ways it had to have, because it scared me just knowing the people that I knew and cared about, because everybody knew who was who. I mean, it wasn't like there was a big surprise where, all of a sudden somebody comes out, wearing lipstick. Like everybody knows who everybody is. They're just regular people, like you said. And but that transition of in my life is something that makes me very sensitive to other people's transitions into civilian life and feeling lost and losing your tribe. And I absolutely commend you on taking that year, but I will say have a backup plan because there's a
Yeah.
hole there. I know you know that.
Yeah.
I'm sure,
Because
but
the
as
year
somebody
ends.
who's been out since '08, I was very lucky to fall into nonprofit and smart enough to hold on to it for dear life.
Yeah, this the support system too. It's I didn't realize how much, because we all focus too on the veteran,
Yeah.
and the transition programs, everything for the veteran. I failed to anticipate how much it was going to impact Tracy, because
Yeah.
she lost her tribe too of the Army spouses who were so amazingly welcome. She loved Tracy loved being an out Army spouse and being able to do things with the other spouses. And I failed to anticipate, she lost her tribe too. And really, I could find places to go and people who understood, and hers was, she had a difficult transition, I think also too, for losing her connection to them. As part of our move, we have moved into one of those 55 and older communities. And we think about it like, because we loved when we finally had the opportunity to live on a military post, we loved it. And this 55 and over community is a lot like living on a military post, because everybody's about their same stage in life. They're retired from something. We kind of all got the same start place. And so we've kind of got a little foundation to start on to form these new friendships and these new connections. And so I think that that is helping her, because she's finding her spouse community again, in a sense, in that her neighbors are her friends.
Yeah.
And for me too, we've got all these groups, and I've become involved with the Veterans and Friends group here in the 55 and over community. And one of the things I did was part of this intersectional conversation is because we've got the veterans group in the community and we've got the LGBT group. And I said, I'm in this episode of the show called After Action that's on PBS. And I think it would be a great thing if we brought the two clubs together and we could see the episode. And it's Pride Month is coming up. And so the veteran group, the president, he pulled up the episode and he watched it. And he wrote to me, he goes, I didn't expect to cry watching this episode. And he talked about that he hadn't ever really thought about it before, but he could see the hurt and the moral injury that we had suffered that came out and in the interview. And so that led us to just an exchange that never would have happened, where I talked a bit about my service to him and he talked about his experience coming home as a Vietnam veteran and the moral injury about how the community treated him coming home after that experience. And so, I think that support system, it's around us. Every once in a while, we got to tweak a little something to bubble it up and make it evident. But I agree with you that I don't know how people do it without some sort of system, even if it's a little one.
I will say that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
I want to take a second before you deflect, Stacy, about you, because I don't think I've ever had a safer feeling, better interview than when Stacy's interviewing me. I don't think that there's anybody better at what you do, Stacy. I've never felt more loved and cared for and more willing to delve into my nonsense than when I'm with you. And you are a once in a generation interviewer. And I cannot imagine anybody, taking your place in what you do. So I wanted to take that moment and exactly what you said, Tammy, is that when, they didn't expect to cry, but see, Stacy has that ability to, the longer you talk to her, the more she picks up on. And that's about 20 minutes in, the conversation gets real serious. And
I have that effect on people. I make people cry everywhere I go, Joe. It's not just I bring the tears. No, thanks, Joe. That was really, really thoughtful. But I will say this. The great equalizer is our military service, right? The veteran community is that. If you walk up to another veteran, it feels like you have known each other forever because we have that great commonality. And your wife, Tracy, is a force for incredible change, a force for good. And she is such an incredible spokesperson, not just for the LGBTQ plus community, spouses, but just as a damn nice human being.
Yes.
And, I positively appreciate everything she does and what you do. But I would encourage her to become an American Legion Auxiliary member if she's not already that, because I think having her voice and her representation on that side of the house would be incredible. It would be a coup. So, awesome. And I know you're a Legion member, so maybe we get her to the Auxiliary. That'd be great. So speaking of which, I want to talk to you a little bit. I know we've taken up a lot of your time, but before we wrap up, I want to talk to you a little bit about. There was a time, and you spoke to it early on in your career, that there was the don't ask, don't tell. Of course, prior to that, there were some even more stringent restrictions, and which led to a lot of service members who were serving honorably to be dishonorably discharged or less than honorable. Mm-hmm. I'm curious. I know you're working hard to educate people about getting those folks retroactive honorable discharges. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and maybe how the American Legion can help you in that effort?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That whole thing of what my veteran here in the community picked up about the moral injury, just really ripples through the population of individuals who were kicked out of the military for no other reason than being who they were, regardless of their stellar performance as a soldier, Marine, or any of the services. And so what happens is that when during certain periods before the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, you were kicked out and your discharge papers, your DD-214, actually had in there that you had been kicked out for being a homosexual. And it had the characterization of the discharge, of course. Sometimes they were honorable, but most often they were not. They were other than honorable or in a category that prevented an individual from being able to access things like VA healthcare, home loans, or any of the other programs. But the one thing is, like say that having that military experience allows some open doors to transition jobs and to good employment. These individuals couldn't take their DD-214 into their interview because of what it said on there. And so thousands and thousands of people were damaged in this way, in that they have their official paperwork has identified them as a homosexual. And many of them carry shame, even though so many things have changed since then. And a lot of these folks that I'm talking about are at this point now 60s, 70s, 80s, they're getting up in age and still have this unresolved thing. But what the services have recognized is that, and what the Department of Defense has recognized, that just being homosexual shouldn't have generated anything other than an honorable discharge. And so there are streamlined ways to apply through your services in order to have your discharge papers upgraded. Now, it may result in benefits, but what it always will result in is a lessening of the burden that you have been carrying of the shame of feeling like you let your peers down because you got kicked out and you weren't there in the spot anymore. It's the biggest thing is that they when they get kicked out, so many people have expressed to me about how they feel like they let their peers down. And so these programs exist in the services. And so, any help that the American Legion can do to when they are reviewing paperwork or having these conversations or find somebody who is in that situation is to use their power as a VSO to, bridge this conversation and help get them to the information and to the point of entry where they can then do the formal request for an upgrade on these papers. Like I say, I've met people who have been through this and the shame they carry, it is just absolutely amazing. I can't even imagine. But the things that they feel like afterwards, it's like that day I felt on the day that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, and the weight of the world was off my shoulders as I walked down the street to Dragon Dining Facility, they feel the same thing as the weight of the world has been lifted off of their shoulder, and they can finally wear their veterans hat, their Army hat, their Marine hat with pride because they're able to talk about it then. A bit rambly, but
No, that's how I roll. I like ramble. It's always honest. It always comes from the heart. I just want to say how much we are humbled and appreciate the time that you've spent with us today, regular Tammy. But before we sign off, is there anything that you want to share with our alphas that we didn't discuss? Is there anything that you want to drop some knowledge on us here?
I'm going to drop some knowledge in it, and I'm going to go back to my unique niche of being the gay general. But just to remind all of you about the power of being an ally. And that is a person who doesn't identify as a member of the LGBTQ community, but who is supportive and inclusive and doesn't think that anybody should be given a hard time or have barriers just for being who they are. Your voice as an ally is amplified compared to the things that I could maybe say for myself and on my own behalf. And if you are an ally, I encourage you to think of it as a leadership behavior as opposed to just a status. And when you have the opportunity and it makes sense, speak up and correct a stereotype or add information to a conversation in the office that might be going astray, and you know, find somebody that you know in the community and tell them how proud you are of them. But you're very, very powerful as an ally to the community, and please use that as a leader behavior.
Bigotry shouldn't be easy.
Yeah. Well, Tammy, I think you already know this, that I'm an ally. So if you ever need to lean on me for anything, I am your huckleberry, whether at the car wash or anywhere else.
Thank you, Stacey.
Yeah. And Alphas, if you want to catch Tammy on that My PBS series After Action, it is streaming on PBS, Amazon Prime, Apple Plus, and you can check your local PBS stations. Her story is incredible. We only touched like the very tippy top of that iceberg, and underneath there's so much more to her, so much depth. So be sure to tune in. Tammy, where can we find you on social media? Do you have a website or anywhere you want to direct Alphas to find you?
You know, I am on Twitter is probably the place that I am. You can find me the easiest, and so I am on there, and I do have a Facebook page, and so we'll go website coming.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for visiting us today. Alphas, stick around after the break.
Welcome to the 86th National Finals of the American Legion Oratorical Scholarship Program, a constitutional speech contest.
We must understand our rights, and we must make sure that we, the people, remain stronger than we, the platform, because our Constitution is only as strong as our willingness to understand, protect, and defend it.
Alphas, thanks for joining us for this encore episode. We hope you've enjoyed this repeat performance.
You can check out all our old episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, or wherever you listen to your podcast.
Even the toilet. We'll be back next week with a new episode. In the meantime, you can subscribe to our podcast, our newsletter, or send us mail and guest recommendations at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. And we'll see you next week.
See you next time.